Magina's story where you can never be sure if the evil is real or born from a terrified mind. Imagine watching children smile while something unspeakable stands behind them. Imagine knowing a monster is in the house, but only you can see it. Welcome to the turn of the screw, where horror creeps in slowly, quietly, and never confirms if it's even real. At the heart of it is a young woman, brave yet unraveling, determined to protect two angelic children from a force she cannot explain. She believes she's fighting the dead, but is it ghosts she's seeing, or the slow cracking of her own sanity? This is a story where every look matters, every silence screams, and every turn of the screw tightens the grip of fear. Buckle in. This is not just a ghost story. It's a descent into darkness, into doubt, into the turn of the screw.
Before we begin, a quick message. Any digital copy of this content is piracy. Don't do it and stand against it. For new stories, subscribe to the Story Nexus at youtube.com /real Story Nexus. Don't go to fake Nexus. Want to know about upcoming stories? Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Links are in the description.
It was Christmas Eve. The fire crackled in the old country house, and a small group of guests, friends, intellectuals, skeptics, romantics, sat together reading ghost stories aloud, a long-standing tradition of winter evenings. The atmosphere was warm and familiar, yet full of anticipation. Among them was Douglas, a quiet, intelligent man who had remained silent through much of the evening, until now. Douglas had a tale that was different from the others. Not just chilling, he claimed, but true. A story so disturbing it had haunted him for years. One that had never been published. A story told to him, written in the hand of a woman long dead. A woman he had once admired deeply, perhaps even loved. And now he was ready to share it. But first, the manuscript had to be sent for. It would arrive the next day. In the meantime, the guests whispered and speculated. What could be so terrifying that Douglas held on to it for years? The next night, with the storm outside raging and the fire blazing inside, the guests gathered again. Douglas held a bundle of old papers, yellowed with age, and began to read. The story, he said, came from a young governess, 20 years old at the time of the events, who had written it all down as it happened. Her tale began not in fear, but in hope, a bright opportunity, a new job. And then the descent. Her name was never revealed, but she would become, by the end, unforgettable, a Job. Unlike any other, she had been living a quiet life with her clergyman father when the offer came. A wealthy gentleman, charming, confident, and utterly disinterested in raising children, was looking for someone to care for his orphaned niece and nephew. He had inherited the responsibility of the two after the deaths of their parents, but he wanted nothing to do with them personally. His instructions were clear. Take complete charge. Never trouble him with anything. Ever. The job seemed daunting, but the man's elegance and confidence swept her away. She accepted, flattered, and a little enchanted by him. She never saw him again. She travelled to Bly, the estate where the children lived, nestled deep in the English countryside. When she arrived, she was greeted by the loyal and kind Mrs. Gross, the housekeeper, and by one of the children, Flora. Flora was angelic, beautiful, sweet, graceful beyond her years. The governess was instantly enchanted. Flora seemed perfect. It all seemed perfect. Almost too perfect. A letter from the school soon after. A letter arrived. Miles, the boy, had been expelled from his school. No clear explanation was given, only that he was an injury to others. The governess was stunned. She had not even met Miles yet. Mrs. Gross, too, was confused and hurt. Miles was a dear boy, she said. Kind, well-mannered, gentle. The governess tried to suppress her unease. The letter must be a mistake. Perhaps he was misunderstood. When Miles arrived home for the summer, he was every bit as beautiful and polite as his sister. Blonde curls, intelligent eyes, a charming manner. Not a trace of malice. The governess found herself captivated, and something else, protective. These children had been hurt by life. She would not let them be hurt again. But still, the expulsion haunted her. What had the boy done? What had he seen? A glorious isolation life at Bly, settled into a dreamy rhythm. The estate was lovely, almost like something out of a painting. Vast lawns, glistening lakes, old staircases, and a great hall where shadows danced in the candlelight. The children were delightful and affectionate. Mrs. Gross was supportive. There were no letters to write, no uncle to disturb, no one to answer to, but also no one else. The governess began to sense that Bly was more than isolated. It was sealed. The world outside did not exist here. The past lingered in the corridors. Whispers seemed to echo through empty rooms. And though the sun shone, she often felt cold. Then, one afternoon, while out walking, she saw a man watching her from the top of a distant tower. He stood perfectly still. The light struck his face, but his expression was unreadable. Then he was gone. Doubt and dread at first, she said nothing. Who could it have been? Perhaps a poacher, a stranger passing through. But when she described him to Mrs. Gross, his reddish hair, pale skin, and sharp features, the housekeeper turned pale. It matched exactly the description of Peter Quint, the former valet to the uncle. But Quint was dead. The governess was shaken. Could she have seen a ghost? Mrs. Gross was hesitant, but didn't dismiss it outright. In the days that followed, the governess became more watchful. She began to sense a presence, feel eyes upon her. And then she saw the man again, outside the window, staring in at her. He made no move, no sound, just watched. The moment was unbearable. And then he vanished. Now she was sure. Peter Quint was haunting Bly. The secrets of the past Mrs. Gross slowly revealed the truth. Quint had been close, perhaps too close, to Miles. He had been left in charge of the estate when the master was away, and took full advantage of his power. He had also had an improper relationship with Miss Jessel, the previous governess. Both had died, she in sorrow, he under mysterious circumstances. Were they now back? The governess believed so. And worse, she believed they were coming for the children. Flora and Miles had once been in their care. What if their souls were still entangled? She could not trust anyone else to protect them. She would have to do it alone. A new purpose and new fear. The governess, now fully convinced of the danger, dedicated herself to shielding Flora and Miles from the influence of these malevolent spirits. But the children remained cheerful, innocent, beautiful. Did they know what was happening? Were they pretending? Doubt crept in, not just about the ghosts, but about herself. She began to have trouble sleeping. She heard footsteps. She saw figures in mirrors. Sometimes it felt like the house was watching her. But she never stopped. She believed that the truth and the children's safety depended on her resolve. And with every hour that passed, the screw turned tighter. The estate at Bly was beautiful. That was the trap. It had wide open gardens, serene lakes, and rooms bathed in golden light. The governess, in her quiet moments, often paused to admire the picturesque scenery, the curve of a staircase, or the way sunlight filtered through stained glass. It was the kind of place where evil shouldn't exist. And yet, it did. Or maybe it didn't. That was the problem. The line between beauty and horror was dissolving at a picture-perfect day. In the first few weeks at Bly, the governess tried to convince herself that she had imagined the first sighting of the man on the tower. She told herself she had been tired or startled by the light. Miles and Flora were such delightful children. How could anything truly dark exist in their world? One morning, while Flora played quietly by the lake, the governess sat reading under the trees. The breeze was gentle. The world seemed utterly at peace. Until she glanced up and saw a woman dressed in black, standing across the lake. She was motionless, watching the woman in black. The figure's posture was eerie, calm, like someone waiting, but also threatening in its stillness. There was something terribly sad about her too, not just ghostly, but tragic. The governess blinked, and she was gone. She rushed to Mrs. Gross and described the woman. Young, pale, beautiful, dark clothes, and a sort of dreadful despair in her face. Mrs. Gross froze. "That's Miss Jessel, the former governess, dead and gone, just like Quint." Now the governess knew for certain. The dead had returned, dead but not gone. Mrs. Gross revealed more about Miss Jessel. She had once been elegant and clever, but after being entangled with Quint, she became isolated and not quite right. Something had changed in her. She had been deeply affected by her relationship with him. There were whispers, even suspicions. She had left suddenly, and then, soon after, died. Now, both Jessel and Quint were appearing again at Bly. To whom and why? The governess became increasingly convinced they were after the children. But a terrifying idea also began to grow inside her. What if the children knew? What if they saw the ghosts too, and simply pretended not to? Miles, the charming, Mystery Miles, now back home for the summer, was polite and witty, almost unnervingly so. He said clever things, quoted poetry, and complimented his governess in ways that felt far too mature for his age. The letter from the school, the reason for his expulsion, remained unspoken. She didn't bring it up, and neither did he. But the way he sometimes looked at her, with a kind of hidden amusement, made her shiver. There was something behind his smile, an unspoken challenge. He would often wander the halls at night, sometimes slipping out of his room silently. When questioned, he would laugh and give charming excuses. Was he being a playful boy, or was he hiding something more? Flora, the silent puppet Flora too, was almost too perfect. She rarely complained, never acted out. but she also never questioned anything. She watched her governess with wide, knowing eyes. Sometimes the governess would turn suddenly and catch Flora staring. Once, when the governess was reading near the window, she glanced at the child on the floor beside her, only to find Flora had vanished. In a panic, she found her by the lake alone, smiling, staring into the water. Had she seen Miss Jessel again? The governess didn't dare ask. Patterns in the shadows. As days passed, sightings increased. Quint appeared in mirrors, windows, doorways. He never spoke. He just looked. Into her soul, it felt like. Miss Jessel appeared too, but only by the lake. Each time, her expression was more sorrowful, more decayed. And then there was the pattern. The governess began to realize that the ghosts always appeared when she was alone, never in front of others, never when she tried to point them out. Mrs. Gross never saw anything. Neither did the children, at least not openly, which led to the terrifying possibility. Was the governess seeing ghosts, or was she losing her mind? Doubling down. Despite her doubts, the governess couldn't stop. She had made it her mission to protect the children at all costs, even if she was the only one who saw the danger, even if it meant sacrificing her own peace of mind. She watched them constantly. She became a shadow behind them. Mrs. Gross began to worry. "You're not well," she said once. But the governess insisted, "I'm the only one who sees it. That means I'm the only one who can stop it." She believed the ghosts wanted to reclaim the children's souls. That Quint was trying to possess Miles and Jessel, Flora. They had once been the children's caretakers. Perhaps the bond had never been broken. Or perhaps she was imagining it all. A letter, a decision desperate for support. The governess decided to write to the children's uncle, breaking her promise to never contact him. She felt he needed to know what was happening at Bly. She wrote the letter late one night, heart pounding, and left it on the table to be delivered the next day. But in the morning, the letter was gone. Who had taken it? She didn't accuse anyone, but her eyes locked on Miles. He just smiled. Was he toying with her, or protecting himself from her? The walls of Bly were closing in. The governess felt it like a noose around her neck. Every smile hid a secret. Every silence screamed. The house that breathes at night, Bly seemed alive. The creaks of the old floors were no longer comforting. The draughts in the corridors carried whispers. The mirrors reflected things that weren't there. Sometimes the governess thought she saw Miss Jessel in her own reflection. She began sleeping with a lamp, checking the children's rooms obsessively, listening at their doors. She was unraveling, but she couldn't stop. Because what if the ghosts were real? What if the children were in danger? Then her madness would be courage, not delusion. The truth, whatever it was almost beside the point. The fear had become the reality. The screw had turned again, and something would have to break. The summer days at Bly grew heavier with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the type that presses on your chest. The kind that hums with tension, with something unspoken. The kind of silence that makes you feel like someone is always watching. And the governess knew Miles was watching. Not with fear, not with confusion, but with intent. The boy who said, "To little Miles was charming." That much never changed. He said the right things at the right times, smiled with that disarming innocence. But his words had a shadow behind them, a deeper meaning, always just out of reach. One day, while walking in the garden, Miles looked up at his governess and said sweetly, "You know, you're quite easily carried away." It was harmless on the surface, but the way he said it chilled her, as if he knew something, as if he was mocking her efforts to stay calm, to stay sane. Another evening, as they played with riddles and poetry, Miles said, "When am I going back to school?" It was casual, but pointed. It was the first time he had mentioned it since returning home. The governess paused, unsure of what to say. He knew he had been expelled. She knew it. They both danced around it like a fire neither wanted to touch. The secret within the smile that night, she watched from the shadows as Miles stood by his window, whispering to the night. There was no one there, only darkness beyond the glass. But he spoke softly, almost like a prayer or a signal. She couldn't hear the words, but his posture, his focus, terrified her. The next morning, she asked him what he had been doing. He laughed and claimed to be talking to the moon. The governess didn't believe it, not for a second. She began to wonder, was Peter Quint listening? Had Miles already invited him back in? The whisper game. The children began playing a new game, a whisper game. Flora would lean in, whisper something into Miles's ear, and they would giggle, innocent on the surface. But the governess noticed that the whispers always happened after strange events, after cold spots in the room, after long silences, after she had seen a shadow at the end of the corridor. When asked what the game was, Flora said, "Secrets." When asked what kind of secrets, Miles replied, "The kind grown-ups don't understand." It was infuriating and frightening. Mrs. Gross urged her to be patient. "They're only children," she said. But the governess no longer believed that. They were something else. The window of terror one night, as fog rolled across the garden and the house was still, the governess awoke with a start. A cold sweat ran down her back. She felt watched. She crept quietly through the halls, heart pounding, candle flickering in her hand. When she reached Miles's room, she paused. His door was open just a crack. She pushed it wider and froze. Miles was not in bed. She turned toward the window, and there he was, standing on the sill, looking out into the dark, barefoot, motionless, and across the lawn, at the far edge of the property. Peter Quint stood beneath the trees. Miles didn't flinch, didn't speak, just stared. The governess let out a cry and rushed into the room. The figure outside vanished like smoke. Miles turned, utterly calm, and asked, "Why, dear lady, what on earth is the matter?" The fear of exposure after that night, something shifted. The governess began to fear not just for the children, but of them. There was something coordinated in their behavior, something complicit. Were they puppets or puppeteers? She tried to confront Miles gently, bringing up the letter that had gone missing. He admitted without hesitation, "I took it." Her breath caught. "Why?" He just smiled. "Because I wanted to see what you'd do." She realized then that Miles wasn't playing games anymore. He was testing her, pushing her, seeing how far she would go, and she was close to the edge, the sound of nothing. In the days that followed, the house became oppressively quiet. Even the bird song felt like an illusion. The only sounds were footsteps behind her that vanished when she turned and breathing in empty rooms. She heard crying once, soft, muffled, but she couldn't find the source. She heard someone playing the piano, but Miles was nowhere near it. She saw Miss Jessel again by the classroom desk, head bowed, face twisted in grief. But when she brought Mrs. Gross to see, there was nothing. Gross's worry grew. "Are you certain you're not mistaken?" The governess's hands shook. Her voice was sharp. "I am certain." But was she? Miles's strange confession. One morning, Miles asked to go for a walk alone with her. She agreed, though every instinct screamed not to. As they walked, he turned to her suddenly. "I want to be bad." The governess's breath caught. "What? You keep saying I'm innocent. I want to show you I'm not." She tried to laugh it off, but the look in his eyes was too deep, too knowing. And then his voice dropped. "You think I'm with him, but he's not mine. I never asked for him to come back." The governess didn't know how to respond. Had Miles just admitted to seeing Quint? Or was it a trick? He gave her a smile that was not a child's smile, and kept walking, a plan to escape. The governess knew she couldn't go on like this. She had to do something, anything, to protect the children. She made a decision. She would confront the ghosts directly, force them to reveal themselves, force the truth from the children. Mrs. Gross begged her to leave well enough alone. "You'll drive yourself mad," she said. But the governess had already gone too far. She believed she was the only one standing between the children and damnation. She just didn't know whose soul needed saving more, the children's or her own. They say once you look into the eyes of something evil, it never forgets your face. The governess had looked directly into the eyes of Peter Quint, and she was certain of two things. He knew her. He would not stop until the children were his again, and so the battle continued. Quiet, unspoken, ghostly, but deadly real. The return to the tower, it was early morning, fog curling around the hedges when the governess climbed the tower where she had first seen him. The first glimpse of the man with the red hair and the hungry eyes. She had avoided the place ever since. But now she needed answers. At the top, the air was cold and heavy. The view of the estate was breathtaking, but her eyes weren't on the gardens. They were searching the corners, the stone, the shadows. Nothing. And then he was behind her. She turned suddenly, and there was Peter Quint, standing silently across the rooftop, watching her with that same fixed stare. No footsteps, no breath, just presence. And yet, as before, he said nothing, just looked and vanished. An unholy triangle back inside the house, the governess confronted Mrs. Gross again. "He's come back. He's still watching. I saw him again right here, where he stood the first time." Mrs. Gross was frightened now. "He's dead," she whispered. "They both are." But that didn't matter anymore. In the governess's mind, Quint and Jessel were not gone. They were lingering, like a stain on the estate, like a whisper in the walls. and the children were the center of it all. It was a sick triangle. The governess, the ghosts and the children caught in between. Except, were the children caught? Or were they playing their part? The dollhouse of secrets. The governess started noticing odd details. Flora rearranging her dolls to face away from the windows, as if hiding them. Miles slipping out of bed at midnight, but always returning before dawn. Drawings tucked away in their desks, faces that resembled him and her. She once caught Miles staring at the old oil portrait of his uncle in the hall, whispering, "I wish you would come." When she asked what he meant, he just said, "Everyone leaves us, but not them, not them." It was the first direct acknowledgement. The ghosts were no longer hidden, just unspoken, and the governess began to feel like the only person at Bly still playing by the old rules. The eyes that never leave. From that moment on, the governess began to see Quint more frequently. He would appear across the lawn during lessons, staring in through the window. She saw him once in the stairwell mirror, behind her, only to vanish when she turned. She once followed him up the attic stairs, only to find no footprints in the dust. It was becoming unbearable, and yet no one else ever saw him. Mrs. Gross began to withdraw, still kind, but now frightened of the governess's intensity. The children became even more controlled, even more charming. They sensed her watching and responded with exaggerated innocence. It was a performance, and everyone was playing a role. The classroom visitor one stormy day, as the governess conducted a lesson in the upstairs study, Miles abruptly stood, walked to the window, and stared into the rain. She followed his gaze and froze. Quint was on the garden path. Drenched, grinning, the governess sprang to her feet, knocking over a chair, heart racing. Miles turned to her calmly. "Is something wrong?" She looked back. The path was empty. Had he seen Quint? Had he summoned him? She demanded an answer. "What were you looking at?" Miles just smiled. "I thought I saw a stranger." But I was wrong. The governess was certain now. Miles could see him, but he was protecting Quint. Why? Was it fear? Or worse, loyalty? Jessel's silent plea. Later that same week, the governess saw Miss Jessel again. This time, not by the lake, but in the schoolroom, sitting at the very desk where the governess had just been teaching. Her head bowed, her black veil dripping with water. But this time, it was different. She didn't look cruel. She looked broken. A figure in mourning. A woman twisted by sorrow. The governess stepped closer, and Miss Jessel lifted her head. Their eyes met. And for the first time, the governess thought she saw pain, not malice, a longing to speak, to confess. But then she was gone, and the room was cold. The governess breaks that night. The governess finally broke down in front of Mrs. Gross. "I'm losing them," she whispered. "They're slipping away from me. The ghosts are not done. They've made a nest here, in the house, in the children's hearts." Mrs. Gross wept too. "I don't know what to do." Neither do I. It was the first time she admitted it. She wasn't sure anymore if she was the hero of this story, or its villain. The spiral tightens still. The governess resolved to stay, to fight. She doubled her vigilance. She watched Miles and Flora like a hawk. She whispered prayers as she walked the halls. She left candles burning to keep away the dark. But the darkness did not care. It had taken up residence at Bly. It was in the stones, in the mirrors, in the air, and as she lay awake that night, she knew something with perfect, painful certainty. Quint was in the house, and he was watching, always watching. There was always something about the lake at Bly, still, silent, reflective. A mirror not just of the sky, but of souls. The governess had seen Miss Jessel there before, silent, mournful, uninvited. But now she believed the lake was more than a resting place for ghosts. It was a portal, a threshold, a place where innocence met corruption, where children played and something else watched. Flora's disappearance. It began with a quiet morning. The governess awoke to an unusual silence. No chatter from the hallway, no laughter from downstairs. Flora was missing. Panic surged through her. She called out, searched every room, shouted to Mrs. Gross. Nothing, until she saw something through the window. A flicker of white, a dress, far in the distance near the edge of the lake. Without a word, she ran. The confrontation at the water, she reached the water's edge, breathless. There was Flora, sitting serenely on a stone, watching the lake's surface like it was a stage. Behind her, the reeds trembled, and then she appeared, Miss Jessel, rising slowly from the shadows beneath the trees, pale, transparent, and somehow solid. Her black dress clung like seaweed. Her face, gaunt, haunted, soaked with grief. The governess gasped and grabbed Flora's arm. "Do you see her?" Flora looked up, innocent, blink. "See who?" She turned back to the water. "There's no one there." But her hands trembled, her lips quivered, and still she smiled. The governess held her tighter. "You're lying. You see her. You've always seen her." Tears welled in Flora's eyes. "Let go of me!" She screamed like something unholy was being torn from her. The collapsed Mrs. Gross came running. Flora collapsed into her arms, sobbing, eyes wide with terror. But still she said nothing about the ghost, nothing about Miss Jessel, only this: "She's horrible, she hates me, she hurts me." And yet she never said who she was. The governess stared in shock. She had tried to expose the truth, but instead it looked like she had become the monster.
Enjoying the story? Make sure to subscribe to the Story Nexus and hit the bell icon so you never miss an adventure.
The decision to send Flora. Away back at the house, Flora refused to speak to the governess. She turned her face to the wall, shivered at her touch, screamed if she entered the room. Mrs. Gross was shaken. "She's not well," she whispered. "She's feverish. This isn't like her." The governess nodded slowly. "You must take her away. To her uncle. To London." Mrs. Gross's eyes widened. "What about you? And Miles?" "I'll stay. I have to. I must finish this. But Flora needs to be safe. It was the only way, the only path forward. Because now the governess knew beyond doubt. One ghost had claimed Flora. The other still had his grip on Miles, the black figure in the hall. That night, the governess saw Miss Jessel one last time. She appeared in the entry hall, standing just within the doorway, black gown swirling though there was no wind. Her face changed, no longer sorrowful. Now, full of rage, the governess did not scream. She did not run. She stepped forward. "You have no power here, not anymore." Miss Jessel's form flickered, wavered, then dissolved like ash in the air. And the silence that followed was suffocating the doubt within. But in the hours that followed, doubt clawed at her. Had she truly seen Jessel? Had any of this been real? Mrs. Gross no longer looked her in the eye. Flora clung to her side, afraid to be alone with the governess. It was all turning, collapsing. Maybe the children weren't haunted, maybe she was. But even then, even in her darkest hour, the governess held on to one truth. I have seen evil. Whether in spirit or shadow, I have seen it, and I will not let it take Miles. A dangerous calm. With Mrs. Gross and Flora preparing to leave, the house fell quiet. Too quiet. The governess sat with Miles, trying to bridge the growing distance between them. He was calm, polite, distant, as if nothing had happened. They spoke of music, of lessons, of nothing in particular. But underneath it all, a tension hummed, like a violin string stretched too tight. And then he said, "When you're alone, do you hear things?" She froze. He smiled. "I sometimes do, but maybe that's just me." She didn't reply. They sat in silence, and above them, somewhere in the attic, a footstep, preparing for the final night misses. Gross came to her quietly, coat in hand. "We'll leave at first light," she whispered. "Flora can't stay another day." The governess nodded. "And Miles?" "Are you sure?" She was. She had to be. She believed one final confrontation was coming. Either she would save Miles or lose him forever. And in that moment, with the house steeped in shadows and the night stretched out before her, the governess knew the last turn of the screw was coming. The final hours before dawn were filled with shadows, some cast by candlelight, others by the mind. Mrs. Gross was preparing to leave with Flora, and the governess remained behind with Miles, determined to confront the darkness head on. No more half answers, no more pretending. This night would decide everything. The last supper dinner was quiet. Miles sat at the long wooden table across from her. The candles flickered between them, casting shifting patterns on the walls. He ate politely, even cheerfully, asking about poetry, about books, about nothing of consequence. But behind the pleasantries, his eyes held depths she could no longer read. Finally, the governess asked, "Are you happy here?" Miles paused. "I'm happy when you're not afraid." She blinked. "Am I afraid?" He nodded slowly. "You've been afraid every day since I came back." The room grew colder. Her spoon clinked against the porcelain. Somewhere above them, the house creaked. Circles of truth. After dinner, they moved to the sitting room. The governess decided to speak plainly. No more riddles. "Miles, I want to help you, but I need you to tell me the truth." He raised his eyebrows. "What truth?" She took a breath. "You know who Peter Quint is, don't you?" A long pause. "Of course I do," he said finally. "Everyone at Bly does." It was the first time he had said the name. the first time he had acknowledged anything directly. And yet, he showed no fear, only curiosity, as if he was watching her for a reaction. A stranger's voice. They heard a sound just outside the window. A whisper, low, male. The governess leapt to her feet and rushed to the glass. There was no one there. She turned, shaken. Miles stood calmly, watching her. "Was it him?" he asked. "You heard it too?" "No," he smiled, "but I knew you would." It was the cruelest thing he had said. The question that changed everything. Later, as she tucked him into bed, Miles turned to her and whispered, "Why was I sent home?" Her heart raced. "You know why," she said gently. "But they never told me," he replied. "They only said I was an injury. But I didn't do anything, did I?" His voice cracked. For the first time, he sounded like a child, scared, confused, unsure. The governess knelt beside him. "You have to tell me. What happened at school? What did they see?" Miles looked down, then said almost inaudibly, "They saw me, talking to him." Her blood ran cold. "Peter Quint?" He nodded, but he was dead. Between the worlds, Miles confessed that he had begun seeing Quint before he even knew who he was. He would appear in dreams, then in windows. He whispered things, funny things, smart things, secret things. He made Miles feel powerful. The governess asked if Quint ever hurt him. Miles looked away. Not like that. But he wanted things. Things I didn't understand. The governess held his hands tightly. "You don't have to talk to him anymore." "I don't," Miles said, "but he still watches." Then he looked out the window again. "And now, so do you." A house of games. The night wore on. The governess paced the halls while Miles pretended to sleep. She heard whispers, footsteps, laughter, always faint, always just beyond reach. She checked the doors, locked the windows, lit every lamp, but she couldn't lock out what was already inside. At one point, she found the piano playing, beautifully, gently. She rushed to the room, but it was empty. And when she turned, Peter Quint stood in the hallway mirror. This time, he looked angry. She screamed, and he vanished. A letter, never sent back in her room. The governess found the half-written letter to the uncle. One she had started days ago, trying to explain everything. She picked it up. Read the lines, the desperation, the madness, and then, slowly, tore it in half, because it didn't matter anymore. The uncle wouldn't understand. He didn't care. He had given her full charge, and now she had to see it through. Alone. Miles and the candle, she returned to Miles's room. He was sitting up, in bed, watching the candle beside him. "Do you believe people can come back?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "I do now." He turned to her. "Even if they were bad?" "Yes, especially then." He looked thoughtful. "Maybe that's the problem." The candle flickered, and behind it, just for an instant, a face in the darkness. The governess's resolution, she made up her mind. "I'll protect you," she told him, "whatever it takes." He stared at her. "Even from me?" That question lingered long after. He fell asleep, because she no longer knew what Miles truly was. A boy, a victim, a puppet, or something darker. But either way, she was ready. One more night, one final battle, then it would be over. With dawn on the horizon and the house still soaked in silence, the governess awoke to a new fear. Flora was gone again, just like before. But this time, the stakes were higher. Miss Jessel had vanished after their last confrontation, or so it seemed. Miles had opened up, barely, but she still didn't know if he was free from Peter Quint's influence. And now Flora, gentle, quiet Flora, had disappeared into the shadows once more. A second disappearance. The governess rushed to Flora's room. The bed was empty, undisturbed, the window slightly ajar. A single white ribbon on the sill, fluttering in the breeze. She knew immediately where to go, the lake. She found Mrs. Gross downstairs and explained with urgency. This time, the housekeeper didn't question her. She grabbed her shawl, and together they ran through the wet grass, breathless. The lake. Again at the edge of the water, the sun had not yet risen. The lake was shrouded in mist, like a veil between two worlds. And there, just as before, was Flora, standing by the reeds, staring into the rippling surface. She was not alone. Miss Jessel stood behind her. The governess gasped, but this time she did not hesitate. She ran straight to Flora and grabbed her arm. "She's here! You see her? Don't pretend!" Flora screamed. A deep, guttural scream that didn't sound like a child's. It was the cry of something breaking. A secret being torn out. "Let me go! Let me go! You're horrible!" Mrs. Gross arrived moments later. She reached out, confused. "What's happening?" "She sees her," the governess cried. "She sees Jessel. Tell her, Flora. Tell her what you've seen." But Flora only screamed harder. She thrashed in terror, clawed at the governess's hands, sobbing, "I never saw anything. I don't know what you mean. You hate me." And then she collapsed in Mrs. Gross's arms. Flora breaks down back at Bly. Flora's condition worsened. She trembled. Her skin was hot. Her words were jumbled, terrified whispers of darkness, of shadows, of her looking at me. She never named Miss Jessel, but she didn't have to. Mrs. Gross saw the truth in her eyes. "She's sick," she whispered to the governess. "Not from cold, but from fear." The governess sat at the edge of the room, numb. I tried to help her. "I know, but she hates me now." Mrs. Gross didn't answer, because it was true. The decision that night, as Flora tossed in a fevered sleep, Mrs. Gross packed a small bag. "She can't stay," she said. "We'll go to the uncle in London. Flora needs calm. She needs to forget." The governess nodded slowly. "And Miles?" Mrs. Gross hesitated. "What about him?" "I'll stay with him." "You're sure?" "I have to be." There was no other choice. Whatever was haunting Bly, whatever was left of Peter Quint, was still rooted in Miles. She would face it, alone. The quiet goodbye. Before dawn, Flora was carried to the carriage, bundled in blankets, her eyes half closed. The governess bent to kiss her forehead, but the girl turned away. A small final rejection. She stepped back. Let her go. Mrs. Gross looked back at her with worry. "Promise me you'll be careful." "I'll do what I have to." The carriage disappeared into the mist. and then the governess turned back to the house. It was just her and Miles now. Ghost is inside that day. Bly felt more alive than ever, and more wrong than ever. Birds sang too loudly. The wind through the trees whispered like voices. The air was thick, like a storm waiting to explode. Miles was unusually quiet. No teasing, no poems, no games, just watching. At lunch, he finally spoke. Is Flora gone? Yes. Why? She was afraid. Of you. The governess stared at him. Of something else. He tilted his head. Is that what happens to people who see things? A dangerous calm. That night, she prepared herself. One final confrontation. No more whispers. No more secrets. She believed Miles had been influenced. Twisted, perhaps, but still salvageable. She would find the root and cut it out, even if it killed her. She lit candles throughout the sitting room, creating a circle of light. Miles sat across from her, legs dangling from the edge of the chair. Silent, this gentle interrogation. I want to ask you something, she said. Another something. Yes, he waited. Why did you take my letter? He shrugged. I wanted to know what you'd say. What did you think I would say? He didn't answer. She leaned forward. Did he tell you to do it? A flicker crossed his face. Something like guilt, or was it fear? Tell me the truth, Miles, she said softly. Just once. He looked at her, really looked, and something cracked. He said he'd leave if I did. The governess's heart skipped. And do you want him to leave? He nodded, slowly, like a child admitting a sin. The beginning of the end. The room darkened suddenly, as if the night had swallowed the lamps. The governess rose to light a new candle, and then she froze. Peter Quint stood in the window, leering, watching, hands pressed against the glass. She didn't scream this time. She turned to Miles. Do you see him now? Miles turned too, for a long second. He said nothing. Then, yes, the room held its breath. Peter Quint stood outside the window, unmoving, like a painting etched into the night. His hands against the glass, his eyes burning with something not quite human. Obsession, ownership, hunger. Inside the room, the governess stood still as stone, and next to her Miles finally whispered, yes, I see him. The wall between denial and truth had shattered. Now came the test. Would Miles break free, or fall forever into Quint's shadow? The governess stands. She didn't hesitate. She stepped between Miles and the window, between the boy and the ghost. Quint made no move. He didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes. This boy belongs to me. But the governess spoke louder. He's not yours. Not anymore. Her voice didn't shake. Her spine stayed straight. But her hands trembled at her sides. This wasn't just an exorcism of spirits. This was a war for Miles's soul. A flicker in the dark, Miles backed up until his heels hit the fireplace. His face was pale, almost blue. Is he inside? The governess turned to him. No, he's outside. That's why we have time. He always said he'd never go. Then we have to make him. Outside, the ghost didn't move, but the shadows behind him swirled as if his presence warped the night. The governess approached the window slowly, candle in hand. "You're not welcome. Go back to whatever grave you've broken out of." She slammed the shutter closed, sealing the dark out. At least for now, the truth unleashed back at the hearth. She sat beside Miles, now shivering. "Tell me." She said everything, all of it, and for the first time he did. In hushed tones, Miles confessed how Peter Quint had begun to appear after his death, how his voice had returned first, in dreams, in whispers behind doors, then his shape, in mirrors, in distant halls, always watching. At first I liked it. He made me feel special. He choked on the word, but then he started asking for things I didn't want to give. The governess didn't press. She didn't need to. The implication hung heavy in the air. Miles's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't tell Flora. I didn't tell anyone. I thought, if I just listened, he'd go away." The fear inside. The room pulsed with emotion, guilt, terror, regret. The governess put her arms around him. He trembled in her embrace. "I want him to stop," Miles whispered. "But I don't know how. You're not alone anymore," she said. "You were always watching." "Yes, even when I lied." "Yes." He looked up at her with wide eyes. "I'm sorry." The final confrontation. Suddenly, the room grew ice cold. The fire flickered low. The shutters banged open, and there, Quint was inside, no longer a vision through glass. He stepped across the floor as if the walls were air. Miles screamed and clung to the governess. She stood and faced the figure. "He's not yours!" Quint didn't speak. He only reached out, not to her, to Miles. "He's mine!" the governess cried. "Say it, Miles! Say he's not yours!" The boy was frozen in fear. Quint advanced, silent, hungry, spectral. Miles breaks free. Then Miles did something extraordinary. He stood, stepped forward, and spoke directly to the ghost. "I don't want you." The air shook. Quint stopped. "I'm not yours." The ghost snarled silently, but his form wavered. "Go." And with that word, something shattered. Quint's shape blurred, flickered, and then he was gone. Collapse. The room went still. No sound, no air, just stillness. Then, slowly, Miles turned to the governess. He smiled, a real small smile. For the first time in the entire story, he looked like a child again. He opened his mouth to say something, but instead he gasped and collapsed in her arms. The silence. After. The governess knelt on the floor, holding him, her arms wrapped tightly around his limp frame. "Miles," she whispered. No answer. She pressed her ear to his chest. Nothing. His eyes were wide, but blank, his skin already cold. She held him tighter, rocked him gently, spoke softly. "You're free now. You're safe." But there was no one left to hear. What had she done? The room was quiet again. The ghost was gone, but so was Miles. Had Quint taken his soul as he vanished? Had the terror been too much, or had she, in her desperate need to save him, squeezed too hard? She would never know. The night had ended. The sun was beginning to rise, bleeding pale orange through the mist that clung to the fields around Bly. But inside the house, all light was meaningless, because Miles was dead. The governess holds the silence. She sat on the Floor of the drawing room, arms wrapped around the boy's small, lifeless body. The same boy she had sworn to protect. The boy whose soul she had fought for with every ounce of her being. Now he was gone. No one screamed. No one came running. It was silent. The governess didn't move. Time folded in on itself. Seconds blurred into minutes. The only sound was her breathing, shaky, uneven, and the occasional crackle of the dying fire. A final whisper as she rocked him gently. She whispered into his ear, "I saved you. You're safe now. He's gone." But there was no echo of thanks, no flutter of a heartbeat, no breath. She touched his cheek, cold, touched his lips, still. She looked at his eyes, wide open, unfocused, and something inside her broke. The moment before, she retraced everything that had led to this moment. Had it been her words that frightened Miles to death? Had the sight of Quint drained the last spark from his fragile heart? Or worse, had she done it, held him too tightly, pressed him to her chest in a moment of panicked triumph, and crushed what she meant to save? She would never know. No one would. There was no witness, no second voice, only hers. The ghost is gone. What haunted her most was this: Quint never returned. In the morning light, not the next night, not in the mirrors or the windows. It was as if, with Miles's last breath, Quint had been exorcised forever. But was it a victory? If she had saved the boy's soul at the cost of his life, was that salvation or destruction? She thought of Flora, frightened and feverish in Mrs. Gross's arms. Would she recover? Would she remember? Would she someday speak of a governess who saw too much? A letter never delivered. She found the torn letter on the floor, the one meant for the children's uncle, the one she had never sent. She considered writing again, explaining everything, but what could she say? Your nephew died in my arms after I drove out a ghost no one else could see. No court would convict her. There would be no trial, no crime could be proven, but there would be judgment from herself. Mrs. Gross returns. 3 days later, Mrs. Gross returned from London with word of Flora. The girl was recovering. She was sleeping again, eating again, but she won't speak of Bly, Mrs. Gross said. She won't speak of you. The governess nodded. She had expected that. Mrs. Gross's eyes filled with tears when she saw Miles. He was always such a sweet boy. He was, the governess whispered. They sat together in silence. 2 women, 1 dead child, and a house that now felt emptier than ever. The house unhaunted. After Miles's death, Bly changed. The halls no longer echoed with phantom steps. No faces peered through windows. No whispers followed her down corridors. It was as if the house had given up its ghosts. Or perhaps it had only ever reflected her own mind, her fear, her isolation, her impossible burden. And now that burden had reached its final awful climax, and nothing remained, an ending without closure. There was no ceremony, no funeral, just a quiet departure. The governess left Bly with a single bag. The carriage wheels rolled slowly down the gravel path, away from the manor, past the lake, through the rustling hedgerows. She didn't look back, not once, because Bly had been a battleground. and it had taken everything she had to win, or lose, or survive. The return to silence. When Douglas finishes reading the manuscript, years later, in the warm drawing room by the fire, the room is silent. No one speaks. What is there to say? Was the governess mad? Were the ghosts real? Did she save the children, or destroy them? No answers, only silence, only a turn of the screw, and another, because every telling tightens the tension. Every reader must decide what really happened at Bly, and would you, in her place, have done differently? The halls of Bly were quiet now, not the eerie, oppressive silence of haunted nights, but an empty stillness. A hollow kind of peace, the kind that follows tragedy. Miles was gone. Flora had been taken away. Mrs. Gross had left. The house stood as it always had, but nothing inside remained unchanged. And the governess, she stayed behind, to face the silence, to face herself, the echoes of his voice. Every room carried his memory. The drawing room where he once recited lines from Latin, the classroom where he'd smirk at her lessons, the piano bench where he never really played, the staircase he crept down during moonless nights. Now the rooms were still, but his absence screamed. Sometimes she sat in the corner of the study and replayed that final night over and over. His face, his confession, the flicker of relief when he stood up to Quint, and then that last moment. She remembered the warmth of his body when she held him, how quickly it faded, how his silence deepened into forever. The mirror that told the truth. There was one mirror at the end of the hallway, the one where she had seen Peter Quint before. She passed it often. For days, she couldn't bring herself to look into it. But one afternoon she stopped, turned, faced it, and for a split second, she saw herself, but not as she was. She saw the woman she had become, worn, hollow-eyed, clutching at something already lost. No ghost stood beside her. Just a governess haunted by her own need to save, her relentless drive to be good, to be right, to be enough, and the price that came with it, the letter to the uncle unsent. She tried, once more, to write a letter to the children's guardian. She filled 3 pages with emotion, confession, fragments of truth. She wrote, "He died in my arms, but I do not believe he died alone. I was with him. I think, I believe, I hope I set him free." She never mailed the letter. She tore it into thin strips and watched the fireplace consume each one. There was nothing she could write that would bring understanding. Some stories cannot be explained, only endured. Mrs. Gross's return weeks later. Mrs. Gross returned to collect a few personal items. Her eyes were tired, her tone softer. Flora remembers little. That's a blessing, I suppose. She paused. But she has nightmares. The governess nodded. So do I. They sat by the fire again, like they had so many times before, but now without purpose, without children to protect, without battles to fight, just 2 women and a memory. What if? That question haunted the governess most. What if she had never gone to the lake with Flora? What if she had ignored the ghosts? What if she had loved less fiercely, watched less closely, believed less wholly? Would Miles still be alive? Would the children be whole? Or would the evil have taken them entirely? She would never know. because in fighting the darkness, she had become a reflection of it, a force just as consuming, just as isolating. And even if the ghosts had been real, she had become their vessel. The departure the day she finally left Bly was grey and still. No birds sang, no wind blew. She walked the grounds one last time, stood by the lake, past the tower, paused by the window where she had once seen Quint staring in. Now there was only glass, only reflection. She left the keys on the table, locked the door behind her. No one was there to see her go. The final entry years later, we are told, the governess wrote one last line in the margins of her manuscript. I loved them. That is my only defense. And then, nothing. No postscript, no signature, no afterword, just the slow fading of ink across the page like the breath of a ghost. Back in the drawing room. And now, the manuscript has been read. Douglas closes the cover. The listeners around the fire are silent. The story is finished, but the questions remain. Was the governess mad? Were the ghosts real? Was Miles's death a tragic accident or a moment of spiritual release? They will never know, because some stories are meant to disturb, to twist the screw until it can't be turned any tighter. And still it turns.
And that's the end of today's story. But don't go anywhere, because many more thrilling tales are coming your way. At the Story Nexus, we bring you the most exciting, mysterious, and unforgettable stories from around the world. If you love adventures, mysteries, and timeless legends, then hit that subscribe button now. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Join our growing community of story lovers. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What story should we tell next? Want updates on upcoming stories? Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Links are in the description. Thank you for watching, and see you soon for another amazing adventure, only on the Story Nexus.